Hello and what's up, political peeps? Per usual, I am your host, Arav Kapoor, and today I am joined by Fairfield, Connecticut's Democratic Registrar of Voters, Mr. Matthew Waggner. Matthew, welcome to the GeoPolitical.
Thanks for having me, Arav.
Yeah, I'm looking forward. A couple things to break down. I want to talk about your public service, your role as a registrar of voters. What does a registrar of voters even do? A lot of people don't know what goes on behind the scenes of the elections that we take for granted in this country and how smooth our democracy goes. Partisanship in the registrar's office, and then talk about Fairfield upcoming special election. Obviously, it's sudden, it wasn't planned, and it's coming up. It's less than a month away, and the registrar's office has a lot to do with the scheduling of that election. So to start, you originally became the registrar of voters in Fairfield back in 2009. You were elevated to the role after your predecessor, Joanne McMaster, resigned. You were the deputy registrar before. Then you ran for office in 2012 for the first time as registrar. Talk to me about why you decided to get involved in public service, first as a deputy registrar and then later assuming the role of registrar of voters in Fairfield.
Sure. First, I'll say that I had been involved in politics and government for a number of years before then. I really got interested during the Iraq War time. That was, for people my age, that was like an animating event that caused us to get interested in what our elected officials were doing. And it's always really interesting to me to see what sort of triggers a new wave of people to get involved for the first time, right? Politics is very generational, that people will sort of have a very similar view if they're in the same age cohort because of what was happening at the time that they kind of became politically aware. So for me, that was what motivated me. I was living in California then. I came back in 2006 to work on a U.S. Senate campaign, and basically got involved in different election campaigns after that. Some local races in 2007, a congressional race, and a state Senate election in 2008. And during that time and being involved in election campaigns, I started to interact with registrars of voters a lot, collecting data, learning about sort of turnout and performance in different places, and gathering that stuff. If you've ever tried to do it, it's very hard to get it all in one place. In the years that have passed, some of that stuff has become available through the Secretary of State's office. It's published online, historical election results, but it was very hard to get. You would have to actually drive to these places and ask to see the documents and make photocopies of them and type them in. And it didn't exist any other place other than that. So I got to meet a lot of the people running elections and befriended the people in the office in Fairfield. And so in between the election campaigns, they would have me help them with different tasks, functions in the office, and computer-based things that they were not really able to do, that we implemented to sort of make their lives easier, which I could talk about those things at length. I'm not sure how much time you want to have in the presentation today, but when my predecessor decided it would be best to step down, they looked at their existing deputy and asked if they wanted to take over, and they said no. And so because I had a positive working relationship with the people in the office up to that time, she came to me, said, would you be interested? And so I stepped up and decided to start working as the registrar. And so it has been now it's my 17th year now that we've been working in the election office. I've been working in the election office, and it's really interesting work. There's a lot to say about it. I like having the opportunity to sort of educate people about the process. There is a myth that is often promoted by town and budgeting bodies and stuff in towns all over the state that registrars work one day a year. The amount of work that goes into making that one day work smoothly, and that we're able to sort of resolve the problems that do arise in a timely way, so that no one is prevented from voting, is there's a lot that goes into that. So that's what we do all year, is sort of prepare for those elections, that when they happen, the list of voters is as complete and correct as it can be, and we're able to assist voters in the voting process.
Yeah, it's definitely a really complex job, and I really appreciate you being able to come on here and again educate voters about this. You were talking about this before. I want to kind of go deeper into the role of registrar. You ran for state rep in 2014. You were eliminated in the primary. Then you ran again for the office of registrar in 2016, 2020, and 2024. So you've served quite a few terms. You mentioned registrars do a lot of work outside of just election day. What goes into before election day and the prep that you have to do all year round? Are you in the office all year round?
So yeah, we're in the office all year round, and it is different in different towns, right? Connecticut has a municipal-based system, which means that every town has its own registrars.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have towns ranging from like 500 voters in the town to upwards of 70,000, right? So the way it will work will be pretty different in those places. Fairfield is one of the larger towns, but not the large, Hartford, New Haven, Stamford,
Right.
Bridgeport are the biggest, and we're sort of in a tier a little bit under that with just over 40,000 voters. So you have an election. And around the election, there's a lot that goes into producing that event. So prior to election day, you are training and recruiting poll workers. There's now an extended period of early voting where you're offering sort of polling place services at a reduced number of locations to your community. There is a lot of production in terms of setting up the equipment, setting up the ballots that you are intimately involved in. Going one step beyond that, there's a nominating process, there's a
Mm-hmm.
petitioning process, there's a primary process, which brings you back another couple of months from the election, where you're setting up for another event and you're preparing the equipment and all of those things for that event as well. And following each of those events, there's also like a lot of paperwork, filing the results. There's auditing, there's recounting, which in Connecticut we call a recanvass. That is sort of providing an opportunity both to check the validity of the results and that the equipment is performing properly, as well as providing an opportunity for people in closer tied races to be able to see that the ballots are being counted properly, to examine that process, sort of the counting of the ballots sort of a second time so that they know that every ballot was counted and that it was handled correctly. So that's just the elections. Beyond that, we also have a lot of duties relating to voter registration. Now, in Connecticut, you have to register to vote in advance of the election. And we are constantly maintaining the list. So every time a person, any person, goes to the Department of Motor Vehicles, they are producing a new voter registration application that comes to us. We're updating their address, we're updating their party, we're updating their name. We also have a process that we do each year that we're right in the middle of right now, where we are updating the addresses of voters who have moved either within town or out of town. And so keeping on top of that is a lot of work. They say it's something on the order of 10% of all Americans move every year. And so what we'll see in our office typically is that there's a huge spike in voter registration around each presidential election. And for the next 4 years, each January, we identify people who've moved and we say, okay, well, we believe you no longer live here. Please update your voter registration. And so our numbers sort of drop from year to year, with an increase again in the fall as we approach general election, decrease the following January until we reach the next presidential election cycle. So that is sort of the routine that we see, but every individual voter has to be handled separately. We have to notify them separately. We have to keep track of their responses. And so that's it's something about around 1,200, 1,300 names here in Fairfield, but it's been in past years as many as like 7,000 or 8,000 names that we've had to update. So that's a lot of labor, a lot of time, and keeping on top of each individual person's name changes and party changes and address changes is it's at least one full-time job, if not several, in a town of our size.
Right. And do you have other people who are working with you in your office to do this besides the two registrars?
So how it works right now is we have two registrars. We are salary position. So we are there sort of as much as we need to be, but typically there 5 days a week, 6 to 8 hours each day. We also have deputies and assistants, and they work differing amounts based on the time of year and the type of activities that we have going on.
Right. That's really cool. There's tons to unpack there. One thing I want to ask about, since you've been doing this for so long, you've been in the lead, the registrar since 2009, and politics, of course, has changed by so much in the last 17 years you mentioned. How is your job different from 2009 to 2026?
So Connecticut, things change slowly in Connecticut. So it is not as different as you might imagine. The big changes that happened during that time was the introduction of election day registration, which they've renamed to same day registration, the introduction of early voting, and the introduction of online voter registration, which was sort of paired with a revision to the way the state dealt with voter registrations through the Department of Motor Vehicles, so that we now are much less seasonal in the voter registrations we receive. Historically, when a voter had to sort of proactively register, you would see a huge spike in October, right? The 2008 election, which was a presidential election year, the typical weekday voter registration from just between people walking in and mailing in applications was about 250 per day.
Wow.
Right.
Manually.
So yeah, manual data entry for each one. And now that's much less, but our daily traffic that we get from the Department of Motor Vehicles and from online is much greater throughout the entire year. So I think that that's a positive development overall. It has changed the nature of it. You can't just not come in for a few days, right? Like you need someone to be in there doing that work, because people are expecting to hear back, is my voter registration accepted? In smaller towns, the expectation may be less, right? There are towns that are smaller where they come in 1 day a week only. Or 1 day every other week, right? The registrars may take turns. You do 1 week, I'll do the next week. But those are the things I think have changed the dynamics a lot. I'll say not necessarily changing the day to day, but there's a lot higher expectation around technology. That the things people are thinking about in terms of the voting equipment, in terms of data, in terms of cybersecurity are much greater. So it doesn't necessarily change the routine very much, but those are new considerations that I think are weighing heavily on people, and also change some of the things that are in the budget, for example.
So my last kind of question about directly what does a registrar do? What does election day look like for you guys? Because where are you at the headquarters, at your house, going around to different polling locations? I know you work so hard before election day to make sure that your staff and poll workers are all set up. But what does election day look like for you? Kind of to culminate our discussion about your role itself.
So I'll say it's different from place to place, and it's also different based on the interests of the registrars, right? So I'll say that when I became registrar, I had never run a polling place myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I chose someone to be my deputy who had that experience. I thought that was important. And so my counterpart, that's how we normally refer to the other registrar in our office, during those years, they really liked spending election day going from place to place, right? So you come up with a division of labor where they would kind of be out in the field, and I would be in the office answering the telephones and sort of resolving problems relating to people's voter registration. You can kind of say, well, do I want to do this task, or do I want to delegate that to somebody else? So I have always sort of been close to the office, responding to inquiries from our poll workers and from voters, and having a lot of experience with that, being able to respond to those questions very quickly when they come up. A voter has a complicated situation, like how long are you spending on the phone with them, and how many people do you have to answer those calls, right? If you're getting 1,000 calls on election day, are you able to resolve them successfully, and without losing calls to voicemail, right? That people are waiting for too long, that you're not able to get to them. So that is what most of my day is about is just sort of staying near the phone and responding to inquiries, both from my poll workers and voters. I will typically not sleep the night before the election. There's a lot of preparation work that needs to be done. I'm going out and putting signage up at polling places. I'm always worried about not getting there in time. The poll workers start around 5 a.m. And so
Okay.
I need to be in the office solving problems prior to that, right? Like if you can't get into the building and it's 5 a.m., what do you do? Right? So like I need to be able to like help them connect with whether that's the custodian of the building or the head custodian for the school system or the police or fire department to get in and get access so that the polls can open at 6. Those things you have to sort of work backwards and plan to respond to those problems as they come up.
It's a busy job, and what you do is super important. You were mentioning working with your counterpart during your time as registrar of voters. Obviously, voting in our elections and our democracy is something that everybody in the United States, I like to think, is really passionate about. There has been some partisan drama, you could say, and some issues that the two registrars have faced over the past couple years. Talk to me about why you think this role that you occupy has become so partisan, and it's much harder for you to work together with your counterpart in 2026.
So I'm not sure. I mean, partisanship is a factor. I'm not sure partisanship is what's driving the challenges that I personally see.
Okay.
I'll say New England, like this part of the United States, has a long tradition of sort of partisanship as being providing an important part of checks and balances, right? That all in Connecticut and in a lot of New England, um, local elected boards are required to have people of different parties.
Right.
That like your board of finance can't have more than 2/3 from any one party. That is something that's sort of built into our process, and that political parties and the town committees here in Connecticut are elected officials themselves. That they that political parties and government are actually intertwined in a way. If you go back to the early 20th century and the progressive movement that took place, there was a large push to make things nonpartisan. And so if you look at local elected governments in the Midwest or the Mountain West, you see a lot of political bodies that are nonpartisan, even though they may be the people themselves may be ideological, and there are still political organizations, but they're much more outside the structure of government than they are here.
Right. Like
So
the Constitution doesn't mention parties, but the Charter mentions them so many times here in Fairfield.
yeah. And so what I'll say my experience has been
Mhm.
is that to be good at this job, and I'm thinking now about my colleagues in all kinds of other towns as well.
Mhm.
What I find is that to do a good job as a registrar, you need to really not have an emotional investment in who wins.
Right.
Right? That the outcome of the election has to really be like not a really big deal to you personally. And on election night, one of the things that I get asked a lot is, oh, who's winning, right? As we're getting all the different results in from the polling places and working on all of the results that are coming from our counting location where we're doing absentee ballots and early voting ballots. People want to know, oh, who's ahead, who's behind. Thinking about the experience as like a consumer of politics and watching election results come in on CNN or whatever, it's so different for us because we're focused on like the technical aspects of getting the results entered correctly. How are you double checking things to make sure you haven't had a typo in putting them in, and that like the who is winning and losing really doesn't enter into it
Mhm.
in until you're all done. You can
Right.
step back and say, well, let me actually look at how many seats have been won or lost by different parties on the RTM. As I've worked with different colleagues over the years, in my office, I've served with 3 different registrars of the opposite party. And the one that was most sort of partisan, that was sort of most invested in the political party that he belonged to, I also had the most amicable relationship with. So I'm not sure that that someone's sort of partisan sentiments or partisan loyalties is actually a really big factor in whether the offices work well or not. It's interesting, and I think it can lead to some interesting dynamics in the office, but I don't see that as a major driver.
Okay, but there has been some issues. So do you know maybe why that there is issues? I know it was mentioned at the recent Board of Selectmen meeting that it took time for you guys to put together information about the February 3rd special election for the voters. And our first selectwoman, Christine Vitale, said that the town themselves had to put up a site with special election details because decisions for what goes up on the registrar's website has to be unanimous between the two registrars. And I'm pretty sure that in that meeting she mentioned that you guys were struggling to come to an agreement about what would be on the website. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, sure. Well, there are a lot of dynamics like that, and I've always adopted the position to never make any critical comments about my fellow registrars, and so I don't think today's the day to change that. The process that we had followed for many years was essentially that we would post whatever we saw fit on our website, that was something that both registrars could always do. That is a process that was changed in 2022 following the most recent redistricting that took place. It was the state redistricting that came down that the representative town meeting assigned new polling places at that time, and the current administration, then the Kupchak administration, was upset that the new polling places had been posted on the website, and so they changed our ability to publish things on the website at that time, and that was one of several things that just sort of was a change to our internal process as to how office functions would be conducted. That, as you see those things happen, you kind of see, okay, well, this takes place, and then something happens in response to that, and then something happens in response to that. And it's very difficult to sort of unwind all of the things that occurred sort of as a reaction to that. But at this point, we have sort of a gridlock in terms of our website, as well as several other things. And in a way, we think about most elected bodies as having like majorities and minorities, that at the end of the day, like right now in Congress, the Republicans are going to pass the budget they want, right? Like there is a lot of opportunities for a minority to make their voice heard, but ultimately, someone has a majority and someone is in the minority. And in a situation like ours, we are equals. You sort of have to live with the fact that the other person has priorities that are going to have to be met. They need to sort of recognize that you have priorities that have to be met. And I'll say that my experience has always been that the priorities that the other person brings to the table are almost never diametrically opposed to your own, right? Like there was an example some years ago where the law said that absentee ballots had to be counted at the polling places unless the registrars agreed to count them centrally. We were counting them at the polling places, and one of the political parties was upset about that because it made the people who were waiting for results have to take longer before they were ready. And so the other registrar came to me and said, I want to change this. I said, well, what I really am interested in is having university students able to vote on campus, right, on election day. So we made an agreement to change the thing that they wanted and also achieve the thing that I wanted. And so like that's I think kind of how you have to proceed in a 50-50 situation. Now, it's very unusual for anyone to experience that in town government, right? There was a moment where the RTM was evenly divided back in 2023. So like people do have a little bit of an experience with that here in town, but for the most part, people are not used to like, well, why can't you just do it the way you want? So you need to sort of find a way to say, here's the things I want, here's the things the other person wants, and what am I willing to grant to them with the understanding that they're willing to do the same essentially for me.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful to note that we all want to have fair and democratic elections that everybody can participate in, and it's something that's super important. People get super passionate about. Now, sticking with this topic of elections, we mentioned this before. February 3rd special election. It's something that a lot of people are talking about here in Fairfield. There's a lot of confusion about it on some fronts. So I kind of just want to go through the process for a minute. Feel free to cut me off because you know more about this than me. So sadly, a friend of ours, First Selectman Gerber, passed away at the end of June 2025. He was great First Selectman, friend of mine. I think friend to everybody here in Fairfield. So the office of the First Selectman was declared vacant, and then ultimately Christine Vitale, who was First Selectman Gerber's deputy or equivalent, became acting First Select Woman. Then the Board of Selectmen had the responsibility to permanently fill this vacancy in the First Selectman seat. That was blocked by the only other member of the board, Brenda Kupchik, Republican. Then it was up to a group of Democratic elected officials to have 30 days to appoint somebody for the office of First Selectman. This did happen towards the end of August. You have a very unique perspective on this because not only are you a registrar of voters, but you were part of this Democratic group of elected officials, and I believe you casted your vote for First Selectwoman Vitale. It was a unanimous decision. So what was it like being part of this group? Why did you support First Selectwoman Vitale, apart from you two being from the same political party? And then we'll talk more about the election process later. Sorry if that
I'll
was
say
loaded.
I was one of only 3 people who was in the group of electors who selected both times that we had a vacancy occur in this manner. One of which was when First Selectman Ken Flato left office and was replaced by Mike Tetro. And that was in 2011. As well as more recently when Mr. Gerber passed away. And so the experience was, there wasn't a lot said about it in advance, honestly. There were no other candidates that came forward. No one identified themselves as wanting to take the position. I've had some experience with First Selectman Vitale and thinks that she did a good job in the interim role. I will say that I expected a process that played out at the Board of Selectmen where there was this deadlock, right? Mm-hmm. And that's just to return a little bit to what we were talking about before. Right. Whenever you anticipate that there's going to be a deadlock that's going to be a problem, there's like a question: do you have a process for sort of unwinding it? To say, well, how do you break the deadlock? Like if something needs to go forward, if the town needs an executive in charge, how do you choose that person if the remaining people can't do it, right? So you had 2 members remaining on the Board of Selectmen. They couldn't choose someone. I anticipated that I was going to propose an option, as had been done in 2011 when Jim Walsh proposed was Tom Bremer as an option to replace Ken Flato. And so there was actually a debate about like who should be chosen, like who has the credentials and qualifications to do this. So that wasn't really the case here. There were no other options that came forward, and so it certainly seemed logical to sort of move forward with Christine Vitale. So there is a live election, so I normally don't issue voting advice to people or anything of that nature, but that is how I voted when that decision came to us.
Right, and just to clarify for the audience, the Board of Selectmen and the group of Democratic elected officials did have to support somebody from the same political party as Mr. Gerber. So even if the Board of Selectmen had went ahead with the decision, it would have had to be a Democrat. Now I just want to talk about some of the logistics about the special election. We talked about at the beginning how much goes into running one election a year. I can't imagine how much goes into a second election in a year. This democratic process was contested, this group of Democratic elected officials, by the Fairfield Republican Town Committee, who put together a petition. They needed 5% of the town's electorate. That was approximately 2,100 votes. They submitted this petition by the deadline of September 9th, and that ultimately triggered a special election. The Board of Selectmen set the date as February 3rd. So as this is all coming into the registrar's office, How do you handle this sudden change in events, this new election that you have to do? You're not even over the November 4th election at this point. So you got the petition. How do you deal with that? And then setting up the election.
So we start having to plan, all of the deadlines, all of the poll worker events, all of the ballot logistics, all of the equipment logistics. There are a lot of towns that have experience with election events happening right on top of one another. In particular, in Connecticut, you have a lot of towns with budget referenda that if the referendum doesn't pass, there's automatically scheduled another one for 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks later. Your equipment may not be able to be accessed during that time, especially if you have other election events like primaries and things happening sort of in that same season. So while, it changes the nature of it for us just to say, well, it's more of a marathon where before you've unwound everything from the November election, we're still entering the data while we're planning the next election. I wouldn't say it's outside our capacity to do. It's possible we would have additional special elections happening going forward. So, we do have, we're expecting to have a primary in August this year.
Okay.
So, we may have 3, 4, 5 election events this year. And, we're prepared for them. So long as they don't happen too close together, you don't have to face too many challenging decisions. I will say one thing that's interesting that people I don't think have a broad awareness of is that the state has chosen this season to sort of unveil a new voter registration software that we're going to be required to use, which they were planning to launch it in January, which would have changed how we conducted our operations by a lot, because we would be either the first town using the new system or be required to run the election without the use of computers, which was something we were looking at for a little while. And it turns out that they postponed the launch until mid-February. So that's not something we're going to have to do. But that was sort of a more challenging and spicy set of problems to resolve.
So I want to talk specifically about funding. A lot of people have talked about that. Obviously, elections cost money to run. You have to pay poll workers, voting machines, tabulate all the results, schools, custodial staff. There's so many layers into running an election. Where does the funding come from for elections and for things like these special elections that are triggered by these unexpected petitions? Where do we get that last minute funding from? Is there a pool?
So elections are municipal in Connecticut, and so the towns fund the elections. There has been in recent years, sort of since 2020 and COVID, there was a lot of grant money that came in because of the sort of unexpected changes to the process that took place that year. And the state has sort of maintained a certain level of grant funding as early voting is rolled out, partially because the way the state legislature works, changes to the election process that are passed in law, you typically are not aware of what the changes will be during the budget process.
Okay.
So we're submitting our budget in November or December. Town bodies start considering them in February and March, and the legislature is operating with passing sort of most major legislation in May and June. Right. And so your budget is often already passed by the time you learn that early voting will be taking place and what the parameters of it are. So there has been some grant funding that's been associated with that. That does cover some of the sort of unexpected elements. And in my time as registrar, we've had a lot of changes as just sort of like, do we put primaries in the budget? So the special election is kind of out of the blue a little bit, but if you think about primaries, we never are sure at the time we have a budget process, will there be a primary here? Right. If you think about presidential primaries, if we're like late in the calendar in April, you'll say, well, will the Republicans still be doing their primary by that time? Or do you think they're going to solve it by then? Right. Last cycle, there was a Democratic primary, but we weren't really sure if that was going to happen or not. And so the question, do you put that in the budget or not, is something that different administrations, so I've had, worked under the Flato administration and Tetro administration and the Kupchik administration and the Gerber administration, they will sort of they've all taken different attitudes about what you put in, and then you have headroom in case it doesn't happen, or do you put it in contingency and wait for the event to happen. And so the contingency line in the town budget, and so this is less sort of like my expertise and more kind of like something interesting about the town that is being handled by other people. They will take all the things that are potential expenses and figure out a weight for them to say, well, we think there's like a 30% chance of this election happening, and we think here's the sort of risk that we have of like an increased amount of snowfall. So we have like, we have to hire extra people for overtime to run the plows and all of the different variables that go into things that might happen.
Maybe.
And so when you see the contingency line in the budget, a lot of work goes into that's not necessarily obvious to people. Like, how did they decide it was going to be $1 million versus $2 million versus zero? So elections are always in there, but like at what percentage likelihood in determining that overall number is something that I don't even really know, to be truthful with you.
Yeah, a lot goes into it. It's important, and it's very interesting to know that all of our elections are municipally funded directly. 2 more points I want to hit. I know you have to run 4 or 5 o'clock in a few minutes. First, it was talked about back during the original petitioning process, the possibility of having a November election and tacking on this First Selectman's election to the November municipal election. This wasn't allowed pursuant to state statutes on the scheduling of elections and timelines with primaries and stuff. But just as Fairfield's official registrar of voters, if you want to touch on that for a minute.
So it's interesting. There was some advocacy to make the election be on that date, and it's just in conflict with what the statutes are. I think part of it is that special elections for some offices don't have primaries associated with them. So, for example, if there was a special election for state senate later in the year, it would not happen on that sort of 140 to 150 day timeline. It would happen more on a 60 to 70 day timeline, because there are not primaries associated with that. Whoever the parties nominate go onto the ballot without the ability for the public to contest it via a primary. So, I think that's
general elections.
What's that?
Does that apply to general elections too? There's no state senate primaries?
No. So for a general election, there is the possibility for a primary.
Okay.
So that would be in this year, it would be in August. If there were, for a municipal election year, those primaries happen in September. But calendar for those things sort of are already well established. And there are a lot of pieces that fit into that election calendar. For example, this week that's happening right now, parties are selecting their town committees, and the town committees can be primaried in March. So in some cities, you'll see town committee primaries. And then once that happens, the next week after those primaries, the town committees select convention delegates who nominate candidates for state office, congressional office, and state legislative seats. So, it goes to the very first week of January, all the way, the process for selecting candidates for the November election. So there is a lot involved in that. So I'm not sure if there's anything else you need to know about the timing of the special election. I'll say, a lot of the time what you see is that people are dissatisfied with a delay or something that's in the statutes that no one ever thought about before. And it may be that, people are feeling like the election should have happened in November. That would be something that a legislator could propose changing, right? So they may, someone may go up and say, well, if the vacancy happens at a certain point in the calendar, then there should not be a primary. It should just go forward and be merged with the general election. And that might be something someone suggests, and that might make sense if people wanted to do that.
Right, it makes sense. And I promise this is the last question I have for you. It's something that's been talked about by quite a few people. We use our schools as 9 out of our 10 polling locations here in Fairfield. Obviously, the main set of public buildings we have here, but it does require school to be closed for students because of security issues on election days. So Fairfield Public Schools have to close school for February 3rd. That creates a childcare issue. There's other repercussions that come along with this special election. Long term, you just mentioned all the different possibilities for primaries, town committee primaries, convention primaries. There's so many different examples of different elections, and I don't think it would be reasonable to cancel school and create this issue for families with children every time. Do you envision any alternatives that you and your counterpart could find to our current polling locations?
So a few things. I'll say first that towns around Connecticut have different attitudes about this, right? So our Board of Education has a policy that whenever the schools are in use for election day, that they will close the schools completely.
Right.
Some schools remain open, right? There's nothing in the law saying that your school must close. So that's a choice that we've made, and there's a balance between sort of security concerns and public access to the election process that we could decide differently, right? Connecticut is also, I don't think people have a real awareness of this. We have much larger polling places than most of the country. In the United States, the average polling place has fewer than 1,000 voters. And in Connecticut, the average in our towns is between 3,000 and 4,000 voters per polling place. So that means that we need large facilities that are able to accommodate a lot of people.
Right.
That works for us in large part because Connecticut, even the more sparsely populated areas of Connecticut, are much denser than most of the country. That if you had a polling place in Nebraska that served 3,000 voters, it might be that you have to drive 50 miles to get there because the population is so sparse in those places. Right. So we could have a system where we have a much larger number of polling places serving a smaller number of people that would then, you would never be able to have public facilities for all of them, right? So we're using large buildings like public schools, whereas in California, where there was a law that you could have no more than 1,000 voters per polling place, people are asked to fill out when they register to vote if they're willing to host a polling place at their home.
Wow.
Right. So it may be that 3 blocks in the town where you live vote at your polling place in your house. And that's just the system they have in place there. And if you wanted to serve, and this is ancient history now. In 2013, I had put forward a proposal to have each RTM member be a single member district, so that you would have 40 different voting districts in the town of Fairfield. And no one took that seriously. And it was a way of just sort of talking about the gridlock that our RTM was experiencing in choosing voting districts at that time. But, you could make a different set of choices that would allow you to do things differently. Right. It may be that people become less afraid of sort of the public being in the building at the same time as students and allow voting to take place while school is in session. There's also the possibility of a larger number of voters taking advantage of early voting and absentee voting, that the number of sites that you would need would go down long term as a result of those sort of changes in how the public votes. And I'll say there's also a possibility that the system changes so that the elections themselves don't take place on school days, right? It was within the power of the Board of Selectmen to put the election on a weekend if they saw fit. And so if that was what they wanted to do, then we would have conducted the election on a Saturday, for example.
Yeah. So there's definitely a wide array of long-term solutions to this issue. I really appreciate you joining the GeoPolitical today to talk about your role, talk about the office of the Registrar here in Fairfield, Connecticut, and our upcoming special election for First Selectman. Sorry for the red coming on my face. The sun kind of just set on me here. But anything else you want to add as we wrap up here?
No, well, I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk with you and your audience about the election process. Just let people know that if they have any questions, particularly if they are experiencing any problems in voting, we always want to make sure that we're resolving that for people in real time as quickly as possible. So call us at the office, send an email. Never leave your polling place without talking to us if you're not being allowed to vote. We want to solve those problems for people. So I hope that we have a large participation in the election, and that hopefully this is absolutely. Hopefully this helps demystify the process for people a little bit.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it was super good to put everything out here, make it clear. And you heard that, Fairfield residents. Reach out directly to the registrars if you have any questions, any issues with voting. Political Peeps, I'm your host, Arav Kapoor, joined by Fairfield's Democratic Registrar of Voters, Mr. Matthew Waggner. Mr. Waggner, it was a pleasure. Political Peeps, thanks for tuning in. Peace out.